It's time to get off the sidelines and get into the fray. My name is Erik Mansur, and I'm the VP of Product Marketing at Crayon, and this is the Product Marketing Alliance's podcast dedicated to all things competitive intelligence. On this episode, I'm thrilled to welcome Fiona Finn. She is the Director of Product Marketing at jane.app, a veteran of such companies as Unbounce and Clio, and she's also PMA Leadership Verified, certified, in case you needed any more of her vast bona fides. We're going to be discussing a concept that us product marketers call the ROI of CI, or really how a product marketer can effectively measure the success of their competitive intelligence efforts. We're also going to talk about the confidence that a product marketer can have in their metrics, how to have both tangible and intangible metrics, and how they're both important. And we'll even chat a little bit about the Spice Girls. Yes, the Spice Girls. But what I was initially fascinated about was, given how long she's been a product marketer, how much of that time was being spent as her company's competitive intelligence expert as well?
So I've kind of started to acknowledge that there's actually been like a bit of a trend in the companies that I've worked for or gravitated towards, the industries that they're in. And one kind of key trend I've noticed is that, I love to work for first to market solutions, right? And with that comes like this luxury of being first to market. You can own your message, but then there's also that trend that, there's going to be a second, third, fourth, and fifth to market, right? And so you need to always be aware of, the space that you want to own and who else is going to want to own that space. I think that competitive intel with that in mind has always been part of the job and just as important as figuring out your go-to-market strategy, as much as trying to keep an eye on what others' go-to-market strategies around you are as well.
That's interesting that you mentioned the first to market thing, because, full disclosure and no free ads. I sleep on a Casper mattress, right?
Nice.
Like so you familiar with that brand. These bed in a box brands of mattresses were born of the notion of competition. They don't exist were it not for the fact that there were other established brands you had to go to a store to buy. Do you view that you're gravitating towards these first to market companies because of the disruption that they cause, and therefore you were born in the crucible of competition? Or is it just like wanting to establish the beachhead for what it is that you're doing?
That's a really great question. I think that the reason is because I've really connected with the hard problems that these companies are trying to solve, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like when there is a space that, has demand for innovation, has demand for a new offering, there's a lot of hard work to be done, especially from a product marketing standpoint, trying to figure out, how to position yourself, who your best customer is going to be, how to increase product market fit. So I think I'm drawn towards the challenge, but also towards the opportunity. And I think I really like to work for solutions that I love and enjoy, and I can see the value for our customers in, right? So I've previously worked in legal technology. So for a company called Clio, who were first to market with a cloud-based practice management software, lawyers were really stuck using either super antiquated on-premise solutions or honestly pen and paper, right? Those were our competitors. And I saw the need for a beautiful solution that was easy to use, that integrated everything. The company that I'm working for right now, I just started a new role this month. I'm working for we are a similar practice management all-in-one solution for allied health care clinics. So manual therapy, mental health, and now aesthetics, figuring out ways to manage your clinic online, manage your patients. And again, a lot of the other solutions are antiquated or pen and paper. So I really am drawn to this is a problem that needs to be solved. How can we solve it? Let's get in the market. Let's see what resonates with our customers' needs. And also let's be mindful of who else is going to want a slice of that pie as well.
But so much of that is the very nature of being a product marketer, right? Like
Totally.
We are more than any other discipline. Sorry, demand gen. We have empathy for our user. So, by going to work for a company, and particularly in the mental health space, which is so important right now, but by going to work for a company that came up with a solution because they identified a customer problem. That's really what product marketing does, is speak to the customer problems, right? So you're actually even further leaning into your product marketing chops, right? Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. We're definitely trying to be super responsive to market needs as well, always, and trying to filter that information back to our product team saying, hey, this is a gap here. This is a pain that counselors in small clinics are having when they're trying to communicate with their patients in a secure way. How can we solve this problem for them in a really meaningful way, and trying to kind of increase product market fit with that segment?
How long has competitive intelligence, so finding out what the other solutions in the market are doing, how frequently throughout your career, or maybe specifically at Jane, has that sort of infiltrated or gotten into your feedback loop? Like how long have you been sort of the competitive intelligence maven, and how long has that been part of your DNA?
I would say close to always. I think that at Jane, I'm using competitive intelligence for my own purpose of learning the landscape, getting a feel for what's out there, getting a feel for what is standard in terms of pricing and packaging and feature sets. So that's really me using competitive intelligence to level up my own know-how of the industry. And then the next phase of leveraging competitive intelligence at Jane will be taking those insights and figuring out how we can create a go-to-market strategy that differentiates us from the others and sets us apart. So I think that competitive intel can be used for yourself as a product marketer to level up your know-how, to level up your own confidence in your market. And then you can build up that confidence and use that knowledge to help support your product team, build a better product, help support your sales team, win more deals, help support your marketing, have really impactful messaging that stands out. So I think that it's always been a part of my product marketing function. It's just taken different forms depending on the go-to-market motions of a business, whether you're more traditional and have a big sales team, or whether you're more product-led and are really kind of figuring out those bits and pieces. And then also figuring out how you want to use it for yourself and how you want to use intelligence to support the teams around you.
So you start with education first for yourself. Totally. And for your surrounding team. Like, we're using this intel just to boost our own level of knowledge to help make us better product marketers, right? And then the domino effect there is that, suddenly you are brimming with knowledge, and then you can suddenly get that to be activatable or more easily activated by other team members, right?
Totally. Absolutely. That's absolutely it. I think by nature, a lot of product marketers are very curious people. And so I think that curiosity and wanting to know what's happening goes hand in hand, right? And then I think that, your internal teams are your customers in a way as well. So you need to take all that information, distill it down into actionable insights that help them do their job better. Similarly to your end customers, you're taking all that value that your product has and distilling it down into a great message, a great campaign, a great onboarding experience, so they can get that value from the information that you're giving them as well.
I love that you use the term value there, because I've heard competitive intelligence described exactly how you framed it, as product marketer does pricing, packaging, positioning, the three key P's of product marketing. So much of that is focused on the end user, the eventual buyer. But competitive intelligence, to your point, is focused on an internal set of stakeholders and the value they can get from that information. So obviously it's a greater level of knowledge is important, and it's a good data point. How else are you measuring that value? How are you getting the feedback that is necessary to know that you're doing the right things, you're pulling the right levers, you're appealing to those internal audiences who are oftentimes just as important as your external ones?
Totally. I think that measuring impact is really, really interesting, because I like to think about impact in the tangible wins and the intangible wins that come with competitive intelligence. So those tangible wins are those measurable impacts, right? That's the difference that your work is going to make for the business as a whole. And so you can measure that and see change over time. You see that in your win rate changing. You might see your churn metrics changing if you can manage your conversations better. You might hear mentions of competitors going down in sales calls. And then as you mature your program, then you should be able to see, more things being measured, more things being managed, and then have greater control over, your competitors in general. I personally love those intangible wins, those harder to measure ones, right? That's that feeling that you get when a competitor's name is mentioned in a conversation and the energy in a room is different, right? When you're not doing a great job of competitive intel, or maybe when your program is less mature, usually a competitor's name being mentioned gives that sense of anxiety we're not in control, we don't know how to respond, we don't know what the narrative is. As you feel your, outputs getting traction, as you find that, the work that you're doing for competitive intelligence is working per se, when a competitor's name is mentioned, people should feel confident because they know who they are, they know where you stand, they know how to manage that conversation. And that's a very, very intangible thing. But ultimately, that's when I know when, your competitive intel work is on the right path.
We're going to talk a lot about the tangible stuff, but I want to get a little bit deeper on the intangibles. You mentioned the sort of the feeling in the room, right? There's nothing scarier than having a sales rep be faced with a question that they don't know the answer to, right? Mm-hmm. And that is the very nature of being, pardon my use of vernacular, but caught with your pants down when a competitor is brought up on a conversation, right? And your feeling is that, you listen to conversation intel, call recordings from your sales and your customer success reps, and you can tell, like, suddenly they don't stiffen up, but they get ready to respond back with a powerful answer. That to you is the intangible. It's the notion and the knowledge that, oh no, I have equipped this person with the right thing to say. Is that accurate?
Exactly. It's all stemming from that education sharing, that knowledge is power, and that power can turn into confidence and ultimately being in control of that conversation, and helping, guide that customer to the best solution for them. And sometimes, that might be saying, hey, that competitor actually is better for your fit. And that still will get you a win in its own way, because it's now like, I respect your company for your transparency, for actually helping me as a customer at the end of the day. But it gives you the autonomy as a salesperson to make that decision. When you don't know what the answer is, when you don't know who that competitor is, you're not in control of the situation, right? So I think that it's that sense of control and autonomy, and it just lets someone have a better call at the end of the day.
That's interesting. It makes me think there's an insurance company here in the United States who for a very long time would put a price calculator on their website that sometimes their competition was the lower price. But they found when they introduced it, they still got a ton of people opting for their solution over the cheaper one because they respected the honesty and how forthright they were. Your team views that as a win as well, because they think somewhere down the road, there may be an opportunity to take that customer back because they were left with a positive feeling, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's understanding your product, understanding your competitors and saying, hey, we do not want to be like them. They're a better fit for you. Or, we know that they're great at X, Y, Z. They're a better fit for you right now, but guess what? We're going to be working on that. Maybe let's have a call in 12 months or so. So you're not overselling, you're managing expectations, and you're seeming, that you are the expert of your product, of your customers' needs, and of other solutions out there, right?
And it leaves the door open automatically, right?
Exactly.
That's remarkable. Sticking with the intangibles, there has to be anecdotal feedback from time to time, right? Like, do you receive that, or do you have a structure for which you can receive that? So whether it be sitting in with sales leadership or customer success leadership, do you say, hey, how are we doing with this? Like, how do you ascribe value, even if it's just an attaboy, attagirl, attaway for getting the job done? Like, how do you internalize that? And do you have a structure for doing it, or is it sometimes sort of off the cuff?
I think it depends on the organization. So I'll give an example. At Clio, we had a huge sales organization. So we had SDRs, BDRs, AEs, product marketing was working with multiple sales teams at any given time. So ensuring that I knew that sales leadership felt confident for their teams is really important. And the way I would manage that would be ad hoc check-ins, seeing how they're feeling. In terms of the measurable side of things, I think a quarterly sales survey is always good to capture that sentiment in a measurable way. And that could just kind of be a really, really quick temperature check almost, right? Like, how are we feeling? Are we feeling high to low confidence levels, and how we talk to competitors, what you need more or less of, just getting a feel for how people are doing and how your programs are working for them at the end of the day. But I think just having those personal relationships that you can have that check-in, say, are we good? Do you need more, less, are really, really important.
So you cultivate in individual interpersonal relationships, people who are not going to pull the wool over your eyes.
Absolutely.
They'll be honest with you about things. And that level of professional respect actually helps you understand the value that you're providing, because you're getting the unvarnished truth from a colleague you have a relationship with or respect for?
Absolutely. You're a busy person as a product marketer. You want to make sure that the assets that you're creating, the research that you're doing is actually valuable. There is no point in doing things for the sake of doing things. If you can do one really impactful training session, that's way more important than 15 battle cards that someone won't look at. So ensuring that you're working with your sales teams to figure out how they like to learn, how they absorb information is really, really important. And that does have to at least start off from that relationship place, and that can scale then after that. But it's really, really important to have those relationships as the starting point.
Speaking of scaling and talking a little bit about the tangible ways to measure value, you talked earlier about competitive win rate. You talked a little bit about some of the other metrics that you use to measure the value of a CI program. What are some of those other KPIs that you have identified as a way to say, I know to push harder or pull back based on the level of effort that's required and the time that you're spending doing it? What are some of those key KPIs?
For sure. So I think I'll just step back for a second and say it does depend again on your go-to-market strategy, whether you are product-led or sales-led. And then I think from there, I think there is an importance in looking at measurable inputs and outcomes. So I think what we're looking at from a KPI standpoint is the outcome piece, right? Based on your question. And when you have a more traditional sales-led organization, some of the key metrics I like to look at are win rate, as mentioned. Obviously, making sure that you have your tracking in place is fundamental to have any of these things to start with. So win rate, can you increase the average revenue per account, right? Not only are you closing a deal, are you closing a deal in a meaningful way that is getting the most revenue potential from that deal possible. I do like to look at churn as well, because competitive intel should not just be looked at from an acquisition standpoint, but a customer retention standpoint. Is a CS person having a conversation with someone because they think another tool does this better, but maybe in actuality it doesn't? And if you have that knowledge, you can navigate that conversation differently. I think that overall aligning with your sales team in that instance to make sure that people are generally hitting quota is really, really great too. So if we feel that we don't know enough about our competitors, people are falling behind on quota, can we invest in our competitive program? And then can we make sure that collectively everyone is actually being more successful as a sales organization? Is quota numbers going up? I think that's really a shared win as well. Because at the end of the day, you are not on the phone. You are not having those conversations. It is a team effort, and you need to understand your role in that team and make sure that you can have those shared measurable wins at the end of the day as well.
You mentioned measurement and attribution there. And you mentioned, you almost alluded to the fact that can be a challenge in some ways. So when trying to measure win rate, when trying to really measure anything, if you don't know that the competitor is in the deal with you, it makes it very difficult. It almost creates an air gap between, what it is you don't know if it's a competitive opportunity because you don't know who you're competing against. Is that data hygiene thing? Has that been a problem in the past? And how have you sort of gotten over that hump with your teams?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. I think that tracking is really important to start with. And, you're not going to be able to track all the things that are important to you overnight. So I think that prioritizing the most important gaps at the offset is so important. So I think starting with known competitors and potential competitors and just creating a list of people you want to watch is a great starting point. From there, I would plot those competitors to the places that conversations are happening or their names tend to crop up. And so that could be on sales calls, but it could also be on new sign-up surveys. If you capture that information from a customer, where have you come from? It could be in churn surveys. Where are you going to? I think that making sure that any interaction that you have with the prospect, if you can insert the ability to see, do they have any information about one of your top competitors at that point, is really important to capture. Data hygiene is always going to be tricky, right? It's going to depend on the tools that you have at your availability. It's going to depend on the teams that you have. Do you have a great data team, or is it just you trying to send surveys places, right? But I think that if you can prioritize your competitors, if you can build out a phased approach to tracking things, and if you can just iterate, that's just going to make you successful at the end of the day. And just accept that you're not going to know everything overnight. I think that's and managing internal expectations that's going to be the case.
I love that you said that, right? Because depending on the amount of time you have or the amount of team members you have, that's going to increase or the amount of metrics you can capture and the amount of the respect that others will have for the data itself is going to increase proportionally, right? So if you've got more time to dedicate to this, or if you've got more team members you can throw at this, then you're going to feel like we're capturing a much more confident data set, right?
Yeah.
If you're just starting out, if you're a one product marketer shop, what is the KPI that you're saying, all right, make sure this is the first thing we can measure because everything else we can build from there? Like what's that first primary KPI if you don't have all the time in the world or 3 or 4 team members and a dedicated analyst to help?
I would start with a input-based KPI to say, I am actually going to do this research and I am going to create 5 battle cards and I'm going to create 1 summary training video. And the KPI I would be looking at would be engagement with that material. Are people actually going to use what I'm providing them with? And then as a secondary spin-off from that, I would try to look at an output or an outcome from that work. So from there, I would want to look at, from those 5 competitors that I've prioritized, can we increase the win rate of those mentioned calls? And I think keep it really simple to start. Look at input and outcome, iterate as you go, but be really, really laser focused on winning if you can, I would say.
No, that makes sense. And how does, if you don't mind me asking, what is the calculation or the equation you guys use to measure win rates? Is that inclusive of all opportunities, regardless of if there's a competitor or not? Or do you make win rate specifically in competitive opportunities? Your rate at which you are victorious or results in a closed won deal in a competitive opportunity?
I would put this on a more focused lens of conversations in which you are talking about your product versus another, because a lot of your customers may not be competitor aware. They might not even be totally problem aware, right? They might have just heard that you do, you solve a little piece of a little problem that they might have and they come to you. So I think that, all your deals are going to have very, very different journeys from, where they are to closing. So in order to prove your value and to have a measurable KPI, I would look at winning calls that are inclusive of another competitor. This may be pretty manual in terms of it may take sales reps to report in Salesforce, yes, this is us being mentioned, and make sure that you kind of create your competitor fields and note taking for those calls. It could be easier if you, require a customer to fill out a form for a demo in advance of your call. And so that you would be tracking, hey, they are looking or evaluating these other competitors and make them fill it out. But I think you kind of always have to take that self-reported tracking with a pinch of salt as well, right? And really make sure that if you are aware that your tracking is not 100% correct, use it as a signal and not 1,000% truth. But make sure that, you listen to those signals and, make the most of them.
You talked about churn and negative churn from a customer success or account management perspective. I found that really interesting because our 2022 State of Competitive Intelligence survey says that 5% of those surveyed believe that their customer success team is not really an important stakeholder for competitive intelligence. And that to me was like, it's great that 95% of other respondents said that they are very important or somewhat important, but not important at all seems to tell me that there is at least 5% of customer success organizations out there that are leaving their flank open. They don't know that if there are sharks in the water, they are ill-equipped to be able to address that competitive pressure. So one of the KPIs you pay attention to is that negative churn, and you are equipping your customer success team almost with a shield. You're giving your sales team a sword. You're giving your customer success team a way to fight off competition.
Awesome.
How do you think about measuring that churn? I mean, does a customer success team, unlike or perhaps just like a sales team, are they aware that their customers' eyes are wandering perhaps? Do they know the right questions to ask? And if so, is there a such thing as a renewal opportunity having a competitor attached within your CRM?
I think it depends on the structure of your CS team, right? Obviously, if you have a super mature CS team and have roles like customer success managers who are going to have direct interactions with customers, absolutely. They should be receiving close to similar training and intel as your outbound or your, closing team members are going to have. So they need to really be in the know of who is out there and what their customers or clients might be thinking about or hearing about as well, and be able to share that narrative with your sales team. You also don't want to make sure that a customer isn't having one conversation with the sales rep and another conversation with the CS rep, and that they're totally disjointed, right? Your narrative of how you position yourself against a competitor should be consistent for every single role within the organization. But back to your question about enablement for CS, I think that, yes, prioritizing CSMs with a really high level of information is essential. We know that people in customer-facing roles have so much going on. They are trying to be experts of the product, of your customer. Layering on competitors on top of that is a lot to ask. But if there is a way to do a quick summary of the most important things to be aware of, you will bet that they will remember those because they are top priority and bring them up with customers when the timing is right. In terms of ways that you can automate CS experiences to be inclusive of competitive intel, if you're using a solution like Brightback, which I know a lot of companies have looked to post-COVID, this can make sure that you can select when someone is leaving you because of a competitor, maybe you can offer up a compelling reason to stay within your automated communication process that retaliates, that positioning of that competitor. And that can be a really, really easy way to integrate competitive intel into your CS and retention programs.
It's interesting that you mention that, as a recovering customer success guy myself, I also know how challenging it can be to not only balance the software or SaaS usage that you're trying to build, but also the financial relationship that you're trying to secure or continue to build. So when you mentioned that you sort of distill it down, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but your customers will probably churn for a recurring set of reasons, whether it be individual features or functionality or whatever. So maybe you can actually equip the CS team with much more targeted competitive intel and much more targeted talking points that would allow them to parry what you presume to be, the sorties, the bullets that are coming in your direction anyways. You can really start there by filtering that down, right?
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah. I think that it's all about trends, right? And aggregating trends, distilling it down and saying, okay, and if it is a trend, it will be important for people because it will be a conversation that they're sick of having and want to change the narrative, right?
I love churn as a KPI, or negative churn as a KPI, because it is the same KPI that your customer success leadership is also looking at. There is almost direct alignment between your KPI as a competitive intelligence practitioner with CS as CS management and leadership is to CS.
Totally.
Win rate, on the other hand, may not be the first thing that a revenue team, particularly net new revenue team, is looking at. Are there other ways for you to be able to measure the success of your CI program in the language of, or the parlance of, or the KPIs that your sales team is using? And what ways have you tried to do that?
That's a really, really great question. Language is a really, really interesting piece as well, right? And I actually don't know if I can easily answer that because I think it will depend on your sales team.
Okay. So talk to me about depending on your sales team, right? Because there are some sales leaders that are, old school brute force, let's get out there and sell. And then there are others that are incredibly analytical. So when you say depending on your sales team, is that what you mean? Is like, it's much easier to sort of either talk about competitive intelligence KPIs or KPIs in general with an analytical sales leader than it is with sort of the old school, let's work the phones sales leader? Is that what you're referring to?
I don't think so. I think that they're very, very different, right? I think that, looking at KPIs like mentions, team sentiment, that might go down well with that rah, we're here to win, that, enigmatic old school, sales leadership style. But I think it's just getting in the weeds and understanding what motivates them and how can you turn that motivation into a shared measurable KPI, right? I am very relationship based. I always want to figure out how can I tap into what the motivators of my CS leadership, my sales leadership, my marketing leadership is. And so how can we then have a shared goal in mind, and how measurable is that? But yeah, it is dependent on their style and what is important to them. I think that everyone in sales is quite data oriented, even if they mightn't acknowledge it or say it. But, it is down to key metrics at the end of the day for them.
But you, ever the product marketer, the whole notion of motivation is a reason to buy, a challenge I'm trying to overcome. So identifying motivating factors within your sales and customer success teams and finding an aligned KPI is by part of the job. Are there other stakeholders within the organization for which you have identified their motivators and have able to come up with other KPIs, other metrics by which you can have some alignment, whether it be executive leadership, whether it be product management? What are some of those other motivators that you are trying to find KPIs for?
Yeah, for sure. I think working with product is always really, really important. I think that increasing product market fit, whether measured or not measured, is obviously going to be a shared goal between your marketing and product teams, making sure that you are looking at the right market that you want to, penetrate, and then making sure that you're building the right things that will allow you to capture that market share is important. Competitors play an important role in that because they may exist in that market and you may want to compete with them, or they might be on your tail and trying to compete with you. So your product team is always going to want to make sure that they're aware of what a benchmark of doing this work is. They might be aware of, is there a better way of doing this work that we're trying to do? And arming them with that information to increase your product market fit in a meaningful way is really, really important.
Interesting. So they view, even down to the minutia of accomplishing a task with your product. And again, we're talking about perhaps SaaS tools here, with the competitor's solution as opposed to theirs, improving that speed and that success, and even perhaps speed to market on features.
Speed to market,
really,
absolutely.
It's efficiency in a lot of ways is the KPI that your product team is looking for, right? Whether it be user efficiency, but also efficiency in getting new features, beating the competitor to market. Right.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. Because a lot of the time, right, we're not reinventing the wheel in SaaS. Yeah. There are solutions that are out there. I think you just want to make sure that you are building the best solution for your customer and could take inspiration from others around you as needed, or you want to differentiate and not make the mistakes of others as well to make sure that you can have the best solution in the market for your customers in the most efficient way possible.
I love it. I think that you did mention, or at least maybe it was I that mentioned, the another stakeholder within the organization, which are those in the C-suite, that are those who are, perhaps it's your executive leadership, perhaps it's your board of directors. They want to be able to have some understanding over what the market is up to, what your competitors are up to. That I have to believe is a little bit more difficult to measure tangibly. Do you find that there is some sort of intangible value you can get from interacting with or equipping your executive leadership with competitive intelligence, and they may not be inclined to take a survey? So how do you measure the value there with those with a C, a chief in their title?
That's a really, really great question. I think I've made this comparison before. Sometimes your C-suite are kind of like the Spice Girls, right? Everyone has like their own character. There is something that's, they all like, there's sporty Spice, then that might be, the sales lead that is very laser focused on this style. Then there might be, the empath on the marketing team that's like softer and cares more about these things. So there's different characters on your C-suite, right? Overall, their goal is probably the same, right? They probably want growth for their company to build a great brand and a great product that has great rev share at the end of the day. And then there's going to be key inputs to that core outcome that matter most to the different players. What I've done in the past, and I've done this both for competitive intel and for, really, really tricky projects like pricing and monetization, is not necessarily surveying your C-suite, but writing down a list of outcomes that you could get from a program. So I'll use a competitive intel program as an example. So what I would say, okay, we're going to invest 6 weeks, X budget, X resources in competitive intel. What are the highest priorities for you? And write down a list of both tangible and intangible metrics. This could be increasing rev share, increasing ARPA, reducing churn. It could be, increasing internal confidence, and making sure that you have a succinct but really, really powerful list of priorities, and make sure your C-suite just vote on those. What is your top 3 out of this 10? What is most important to you? And come back to them and say, okay, collectively, as a C-suite, we can't do everything, but these are the top 3 that your team has decided is most important and the outcomes that you want to get from a CI program. And it's that they have voted on it. Sometimes you might have to disagree and commit to one priority over another, or you might want to squeeze in another one, but making sure that they're on the same page before you launch into any research, any investment, any large scale program. Make sure that they're on the same page. They know what to expect from the outcome, and then you're just going to have them bought into anything that happens after that.
I cannot believe that the start of that answer to your question included a mention of the Spice Girls and Sporty Spice, my personal favorite Spice Girl, Melanie Chisholm. But I do want to double click on the notion that what you've basically done is you've created a measurement by way of OKR, essentially. Yeah. You've said to your executive leadership team, you define the objectives, and then we will measure the key results against that objective, as opposed to walking into a sales organization where you can presume that there are certain metrics that you're going to look to achieve. Same thing with customer success. You're going to your executive team, who could have different personalities throughout, including, Baby Spice on the other end of the table. And you're wondering, hey, what is it that I can do for you? And then at the end of a quarter, at the end of a year, we can actually set a yardstick against it and see if we've actually achieved what it is we were looking to achieve.
Totally. Absolutely.
How do you start that conversation? You mentioned by way of a survey, but, if you coming into a new company like you've just done, do you have to build rapport first, or do you sort of hit the ground running and say, oh, okay, guys and gals, I'm here. What do you need me to do?
I do tend to lean on the side of asking for forgiveness, not permission.
Okay.
I think that you are there to do a job because you, as a product marketer, have a unique or different set of skills from those around you. And I think that hit the ground running, say, just jump in, right? You are the expert of the market. You are the voice of the customer. You are the eyes of the competition. People want to look to you to be that expert. So just get started. Say, okay, where do we sit with our competitors? What is our sentiment around competitors? As leadership of this organization, what is most important to you to learn? Get that information, and then start to structure your program around that.
One of the hallmarks of structure that you just mentioned there is tools and an ability for somebody in an offline or online or an offline way to see results. How are you, whether it be leveraging something like a Google Docs, Google Sheets, Salesforce, other BI tools, how are you plugging your KPIs, your CI KPIs, into a location for which your sales leadership, your C-suite, your CS leadership can actually see it, measure it, and then understand trend lines and things of that nature?
Oh gosh, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's been different at every single organization.
Really?
Just because, number one, internal teams use different tools differently. Number two, each year technology is changing, so we have more tools at our disposal. And then number three, I think different organizations do track things at different cadences. And some organizations, annual goals is most important. In other organizations, quarterly OKRs are, and in other organizations, they're just trying to get things done, and quick wins are what is most important to them, right? I do start off with the basics and just keep things in Excel, and then I can actually control everything. And then from there, make sure that we are integrating tracking into whatever systems are most visible to people, right? So people aren't looking for that measure. People aren't they don't have to go digging to see if the work you're doing is important. It's front and center, right? If there is a key KPI dashboard in, whatever metrics tool that you're using, if you can see win rate, if you can see ARPA, if you could see some degree of market share that you can correlate with competitiveness in that dashboard, I think that's really important.
That, to me, I think is such an unspoken thing with regards to boosting up the visibility of your CI program. Like, don't make somebody go look for it. Don't create your own dashboard someplace and expect somebody to have the link. Make your metrics part of everybody else's metrics so they can actually see and converse around these things. It's part of the overall flow of what it is that they're doing. I think that's such an unsung thing. So therefore, when you're just hitting the ground running, to your point, and making the waves and perhaps doing things that you may have to ask for forgiveness for, you also have to pony up or sidle up next to the business intelligence person or to the Salesforce person or whoever the CRM administrator is, and get them bought in as well. So, really, the advice here is recognize you're going to have to start reporting on this at some point. Yeah. Start getting to know the reporting or the analytics people first in order to start laying that groundwork, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said before, prioritize your competitors, have a small but mighty list to start with, and then bring that to, your data teams and say, okay, what can we track? How do we start? Can we have a phased approach to scaling this? But as you said before, it won't happen overnight. Be patient, manage those expectations, and just have a clear set of priorities.
We've talked about this a little bit, this notion of a spectrum of maturity of a competitive intelligence and how you've enjoyed getting in on the ground floor with disruptors or somebody who is first to market with something, born of the notion that they know competition either exists or is going to exist soon thereafter. So there's got to be some teams that are thinking about KPIs, ROI of CI, but are not thinking to the next stage, which is, okay, we're going to set a goal for 2022, and then quarterly or by the end of the year, we're going to have to atone for the fact that we either missed it or we overachieved it. Mm-hmm. Have you reached that point where you've been able to set benchmarks, set yardsticks, set goals that you are looking to achieve in 2022 for those CI KPIs, whether it be win rate or negative churn or otherwise influenced that CI was able to have?
I would say indirectly, yes. So okay. I think the greatest kind of impact that you can have, probably from a growth perspective, is increasing market share, right? And that would be making sure that you capture more of the deals that come your way or that you go after. To that, talking about competitors are going to be in a percentage of those conversations. So making sure that you can own those conversations and manage them should ultimately impact your overall market share or growth rate. So I think that making sure that you are looking at growth, you are looking at entry into new markets, and if there's a key competitor in one of those markets, that you can win all of those conversations with that competitor because you know everything about them. I think that's really important.
What does the future hold for CI measurement? Like, do you feel that there is yet another shoe to drop, or there is there's soon to be potentially a disrupting software startup that helps measure the effectiveness of product marketing efforts, competitive intelligence included? Like, where do you see the future? What does the future hold for competitive intelligence measurement, ROI of CI, as time goes forward?
I see the future of CI being less of a long-term measurable program and something that is incorporated into everyday business insights, to be honest with you. So, we're just living in a world where technology is changing so fast. Our situations are constantly changing. Disruption is just normal at this point in time. That's saying we are going to measure things on an annual basis or a yearly basis when it comes to your CI program just isn't enough. So I think that the future is really making sure you integrate CI into your day-to-day, and that there's constant metrics that are showing themselves by osmosis is actually going to be the difference maker for businesses of every size. So if you can do reporting and integrate that into Slack and daily, hey, here's the key metrics automated by a bot in Slack. It's front of mind. It's just going to be there, and it's going to be, integrated into your day-to-day. I think it's going to be the biggest change.
As we were closing up our conversation, I was really fascinated as to, sort of a parting shot. What did Fiona really want to say to product marketers out there as they were starting to think about measuring their competitive intelligence efforts and the value for which they ascribed to those efforts?
I would say, don't be afraid to start small and scale. I would say, identify your biggest competitors, your biggest threats, go deep on them, and make sure that the work and the information you're churning out is important to the key stakeholders. You're not going to do it all at once. You won't have a super advanced measurable program overnight. It will take a lot of groundwork, but then once you have it, it will just be invaluable to your team and business. And it'll give you a different type of confidence in your role as well that also can't be ignored. So, yeah.
That's it. That's the ball game. Here's the buzzer. Our time together is up. I really loved my conversation with Fiona Finn from jane.app, and many, 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 many thanks to her for joining me. I was thrilled to be able to talk with her about the concept of revealing the true and measurable value that your company's CI program can provide, and how so many different stakeholders are going to have so many different KPIs, some they have to define for themselves. So if you've got a hot take or a topic about competitive intelligence that you want to discuss on a future podcast, drop me a line. I'm easily findable. I'm active on the PMA Slack team. Just look for me in the competitive analysis channel, or send me an email at erik@crayon.co. That's Erik, E-R-I-K, by the way. Thanks for listening to the Product Marketing Alliance's podcast, Into the Fray, presented by Crayon. If you liked what you heard, please consider hitting the subscribe button, either on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Erik Mansur, and until next time, whoever you are, whatever you're doing, make sure you get out there and compete like you mean.